Get ready to expand your sense of wonder with the Cinefantastique podcast. Welcome to the return of the Cinefantastique Black Hole Ultra Lounge podcast. It's been a while since we've done one of these, but we're reviving the tradition. I don't know why. I'm bored. I need something to do. Choose your excuse.
It keeps you off the street.
Keeps me out of trouble. Or maybe not. We'll see how it goes. This is Volume 4, number 47.2 for the week of Tuesday, December 17th, 2013. Why Tuesday? Maybe that will become clear by the end of the show. Pay attention. I am Steve Biodrowski, managing editor of Cinefantastique Online, the website of horror, fantasy, and science fiction films. Along with me are two of the stellar stars of CFQ history, Dan Persons, Lord High Master of Cine Imagination in New York. How you doing, Dan?
Stellar!
And Lawrence French, fountain of genre wisdom in San Francisco. How are things on the foggy West Coast?
Oh, they're wonderful.
Oh, good to hear it. So today we're going to be looking at all kinds of stuff, some Borderland genre titles, some stuff that's new on video. Maybe we'll have a few reviews of things like Day of the Doctor and other stuff that hopefully will be of interest to you. But I wanted to start off with something that got a little bit of play on Facebook this week, shows me that there's at least some interest, which is the new teaser trailer for Godzilla, which is also on front of The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, which is in theaters now. Obviously, it's been 15 years since the last American-made Godzilla film, and we all know how well that one turned out. So this trailer obviously has a big hurdle to clear, which is getting people to think, yes, I will spend money on a ticket once again to see this thing that turned out so well last time. So what do you think, Larry? Does it clear the hurdle? Does it at least raise some interest? Like, maybe I'll give this a shot?
Well, it's very difficult because, remember, we've had Pacific Rim already, and which was a big disappointment to me anyway. And I think, coming on so soon after that, I don't think it really does raise the hurdle. And, of course, the trailer doesn't really show anything of Godzilla himself, or brief glimpses. So I'm sure they can do wonders with the design and so forth. But, it's just it's going to be a hard sell to make it into a 300 million grossing movie that they're hoping for.
Right. Dan, what do you think?
Well, when you put Ligeti's Requiem on the soundtrack, you've already got my attention.
Yes, well known because of its use behind the monolith on the moon
in 2001. At least they're breaking out of Zarathustra as being the only 2001 reference.
Well, I think the more important thing is they're doing a trailer that doesn't have Led Zeppelin in it, which is, it was Kashmir was the trailer for the 1998 Godzilla. So they're clearly kind of giving a backhanded slap to the Roland Emmerich film and telling audiences, we're going another direction. We're referencing one of the greatest movies ever made. What do you think of that?
I'm of two feelings about this. One is that, yes, Pacific Rim already broke my heart. So it's like, and by the way, yes, the other Godzilla film as well. So, it's like, are we going in this direction again? The other thing is that this is being directed by Gareth Edwards, whose previous film was this little, very, very small scale science fiction film called Monsters, which had a number of problems narratively as well. But it was more interesting as an idea than I think it was as a film. But he comes out of special effects, in particular with Monsters. He showed what he could do with creating very convincing special effects with absolutely no budget. He pretty much did the entire thing on a laptop. And so I am curious to see, because his narrative approach in Monsters was rather unique, even if I don't think it was particularly successful. I'm hoping that he can bring something to this that Roland Emmerich could not.
Wouldn't take too much to bring more to it than that.
Okay.
The first thing he's bringing to it is Godzilla's actually going to be in the movie, which is always nice if they're going to put that in the title. I had skipped or had avoided watching it, on YouTube or whatever. So my first experience was seeing it in the theater. It's a nice teaser. You don't know what it's about. It's kind of cagey with all this grim suggestion of these people doing this high altitude parachute jump and exactly what kind of a mess they're jumping into. And when you through the smoke and the haze of what looks like a ruined city, when you catch that first kind of outline of those spiky dorsal fins, you went, ooh, this looks interesting. And yeah, we only see a couple glances of Godzilla, but he does look like an updated, more realistic version of the real creature, not this oversized mutant iguana we got before. For me, my concern is basically what you guys have said. Okay, Pacific Rim, disappointment. This is Legendary Pictures, same company. Are they going to be able to make this into something that sells not just to the geeks, but to a mainstream audience? I remember being at the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood when the trailer for the Roland Emmerich film played 15 years ago. And as it ended, instead of being excited, someone in the theater next to me said, man, they'll just make a movie out of anything nowadays. And at that time, all they had to overcome was the memory of the low budget, kind of films that were showing on TV. Now they have to overcome that plus the Emmerich movie. And I'm like, maybe if people give it a chance, this looks as if it has potential. But I don't know. As Larry says, it's a tough sell at this point. That, what are we going to get this time that we didn't before? And what it looks like we're going to get is a serious, scary movie. So I'm all for that. I'm tired of the camp and whatever. And I certainly didn't need a movie in which somebody's pissed because Godzilla trashed Madison Square Gardens and a French guy can't get a decent cup of coffee in New York because they don't have delis in New York.
Another thing this film has, daylight Godzilla.
But we don't see him in the trailer. All we see is smoggy, foggy.
Smoggy, but it appears to be daylight.
And speaking of smog, Godzilla would kick Smog's ass. I was just thinking of that since it did run at the front of Desolation of Smaug.
What about the smog monster?
Yeah, that too. Well, I'm sure that'll be one of the sequels somewhere down the line. So other things going on in the news, the Academy Awards, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences released their list of finalists in the special effects categories, and Larry wants to tell us about them.
And the special effects category is also always of interest to us because they're usually science fiction films or fantasy films. And in this case, the 10 finalists are all actually, except for one, are all science fiction films. And they are Gravity, The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, Star Trek Into Darkness, World War Z, Thor, The Dark World, Pacific Rim, Iron Man 3, Asylum, and The Lone Ranger, and Oblivion. And the 11th, which didn't make the cut, of course, is Man of Steel. So that's sort of an eye-opener. But as you can see, all 10 are fantasy or science fiction related movies. So that's pretty...
Well, Lone Ranger is a lock, clearly.
I would say, I was surprised that got in there.
Yeah, well, there always has to be one, doesn't there?
Just about.
But I would say Gravity would be, because it's clearly the best science fiction movie this year. We might have a clear lock on that.
Gravity is essentially a 90-minute special effect.
Yeah, that's one thing. I think the more decisive factor is going to be the Academy at least claims to weigh dramatic impact. So, if you have great visual effects just to establish a location, that we're in France, even though we didn't go on location, you're not going to win an award. It's got to be something that they feel contributed something dramatic to the story. And I think with Gravity, it has, a lock in that sense. Technical elements aside, I certainly hope it wins. And I would, even though I didn't think too much of Pacific Rim as a movie, that should at least be nominated because I think that's going to set the style, hopefully, for this kind of movie from now on, where you capture the sense of scale by slowing things down. Something that big throwing a punch, it's going to take, 60 seconds or whatever for it to land. because it's got a long way to go. Okay, and before we wrap up the news portion of the show, we're going to take a moment to note the passing of actor Peter O'Toole. Most of you know him as Lawrence of Arabia. Don't think of him as a genre figure, but he did have some credits in horror, fantasy, and science fiction films. High Spirits, the supernatural comedy from Neil Jordan, the Ray Bradbury Theater episode Banshee, based on the wonderful short story that Bradbury wrote based upon his relationship working with John Huston on Moby Dick. Phantoms, which was a bit of a dud of a movie in 1998, but O'Toole was pretty decent in it. And he, of course, was wonderful as the voice of Anton Ego in Ratatouille, the wonderful food critic in that film. So he earned a small place in genre history, I think, for that. And we just got news, I think, this morning that he had passed away.
And he was such a great actor who didn't ever win an Academy Award, which is, it's just
well,
amazing.
He won the Lifetime Award.
Yeah, I know, but he didn't win a competitive Academy Award. In fact, when he got that, he said, why don't you wait till I'm 80 because I'm still in the game. And he was, because you look at a film like Troy where he was so good, and he wasn't even nominated for that, but he finally got nominated for this film Venus again, although he didn't win. So, it's just it highlights what, the Academy can't possibly give an award to everybody, even if you've been nominated 7 or 8 times. It's just the luck of the game. And people would say, oh, they snub him. And they don't really snub you. It's just, you have bad luck because they obviously gave him a special honorary award. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I wish he had made more great fantasy films rather than Supergirl.
Yeah, Supergirl, where he played one of the kryptonites, right?
Anyway, so let's look at what's out on video or coming out on video on Tuesday, which is, for those of you playing at home, why this podcast is dated for Tuesday, December 17th. Not that much, but a few interesting titles. On disc is going to be Elysium. So if you like Blu-ray, DVD, or you can get it in the ultraviolet mode, Kick-Ass 2, Percy Jackson and the Sea of Monsters, all will be available in real tangible formats that you can purchase and take home and hold in your hands and put on your shelves and collect. Also coming out on video on demand, Riddick will be available in theatrical and unrated director cuts. The disc will follow on January 14th. We Are What We Are is going to be on a VOD. Also coming out on disc, and I saved this for last because we're going to talk about it a little bit more, Day of the Doctor on Blu-ray and DVD this Tuesday. This premiered last month on BBC, also screened in theaters around the country. This is the 50th anniversary telefilm that unites David Tennant and Matt Smith, the two most recent Doctors. Also gives us a new, at least to us viewers, version of the Doctor played by John Hurt. This was a pretty spectacular geek fest that did its best to satisfy all the fans out there, giving them what they wanted, a great celebration of this character who's been around 50 years, found some clever ways to sneak in other versions of the Doctor, basically all of them, not actually that they got the actors there, but archival footage or whatever, they managed to do it. It's a pretty decent story. It deals with some interesting moral conflicts. There's a lot of fun. And of course, whenever they do something like this, the real appeal is, what's the interplay going to be like when the Doctor meets an older or younger version of himself? And they did a good job. So they didn't just satisfy the requirements. They actually made, a pretty decent show out of it. The disc comes with some nice features, including some short mini episodes. The really crucial one is Night of the Doctor, which kind of bridges the gap between the telefilm that was on Fox television back in the 90s, which had Paul McGann as the Doctor, who was never seen again in the role until now. So we see how he became the War Doctor, the character played by John Hurt, who shows up in Day of the Doctor. There's also a bit called The Last Day, which really isn't essential. It seems to be a POV of a young recruit, a Gallifreyan soldier, on the day that the Daleks break through Gallifrey's defenses. I guess it's okay, but it really doesn't show you anything that you need to know to, understand the continuity. Whereas, the Night of the Doctor actually does help fill in some stuff. There's also a really cool behind-the-scenes documentary. It's kind of really fluffy, what you would expect The clever touch there is their narration doesn't have the usual objective tone to it. It's always, we did this, we did that, and you're wondering, who is this guy? He sounds as if he's so much a part of the story. Well, in the very last shot, they show us that it's being narrated by Colin Baker, the sixth Doctor Who from the old TV series. There's a wonderful thing called Doctor Who Explained. This is for, I think, or of most benefit to recent people who came to the show in the 2000s with Christopher Eccleston, who maybe know there was this older thing back on BBC that was really cheesy, but they don't quite know what it was about or what the Doctor's origins were. This will give you the primer on the whole story from the beginning to the end. So if you only know the show from the last, 6 years, 7 years or so, whatever it is, you'll get filled in on all the blanks there. And also there's a couple trailers, one from Comic-Con and one that's a teaser trailer. So it's a pretty nice package altogether. The film itself, as I said, is worth seeing, and they have some good features. I would give this one, I think, a 4-star rating there. And I know, Dan, you reviewed this when it showed on BBC, and you were pretty positive, right?
Yeah. You know what? It's a gimmick show, but it is a very good gimmick show with actually some more emotional resonance than you would expect from this sort of thing. The interplay between the three doctors that we get, the three main doctors that we get there, is fantastic, and it was just a very satisfying way of commemorating the 50th anniversary. I thought it was very well done.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's kind of it for what's coming out, but there's some other stuff out there in the video realm we want to talk about. Since we did The Hobbit in the spotlight this week, Larry thought it would be interesting to take a look at The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, which is available on an extended cut on DVD. So what's there that we didn't see in theaters last year, Larry?
Well, now the extended cut runs 182 minutes.
Holy shit.
14 minutes have been added into the film, and a lot of it is quite extraneous, but, it adds little comedy scenes, or in some cases backstory, which you guys both thought were already overextended. So I thought one of the good scenes, though, was when in the White Council, Gandalf's talking about what happened to the 7 dwarf rings, and that was cut out of the original cut. And, what happened was the dragon ate or got 4 of the dwarf rings, and 2 were lost, and the one Thorin's father had is missing. And then there's also a little dialogue where Bilbo overhears Elrond and Gandalf talking about the strain of madness that runs deep in Thorin's family. So that sets up the whole thing of what Thorin is trying to do and find the rings back. And there's also a little bit about the ancestor of Bard of Lake Town, who was the guy when the smog originally decimates Dale. His ancestor, Girion, is the guy who was shooting the arrows at Smog and missed him. And, of course, the dwarfs blame him for not killing the dragon in the first place. And he's played by Luke Evans, who, of course, plays Bard in the second Hobbit movie. So there's little scenes like that, and there's like lots of little things with more comedy things, like the Great Goblin does a whole dance number, which is cut down in the original to just like a snippet of the dance number and song. So things like that. And there's also 9 hours of extras about the making of The Hobbit, which is, pretty extensive. And it's very interesting because they're called parts 7 and 8, and it's like, well, what happened to the first 6 parts? And it turns out, as Peter Jackson introduces it, he's referring to the appendices for the first 3 Lord of the Rings movies, which each had 2. So for Fellowship of the Ring, we got part 1 and 2, and up to Return of the King, it was part 5 and 6, and then for The Hobbit, we get part 7 and 8. So that explains that weird numbering system. It's sort of like how Star Wars came out and was episode 4, and people would be wondering, what were you talking about, episode 4? So it's the same kind of thing here. But, what's fascinating, I think, in the making of documentaries, there's been so much new technology. And this, because this is pretty much the most extensive kind of behind the scenes you're going to get on any kind of movie. I think it really goes into not only the editing and the pre-production and all that. It really, it's amazing because, over the years, when we've been writing our making of articles for Cinefantastique, how much things have changed. And so we really get a glimpse into how everything has changed with the digital world now. And I thought that was rather fascinating to see it in such detail, even if you don't like the movie.
So essential viewing?
Essential viewing if you like the movie. And of course, if you didn't, there's no point in getting it. Certainly not if you thought it was too long to begin with.
If you were going to give it a rating from 0 to 5, what would you do?
So I would give it 4 stars for, just for completeness alone.
Cool. So, it sounds like there's interesting behind-the-scenes stuff that would be, of some interest, even if you weren't completely satisfied with the film.
Yes, but, way more than, because there's, as you say, it's 9 hours, so, you get bored after a while, after a half hour watching just one segment on, say, the design of the thing. You're going to get bored.
So you can't just rent this to see the bonus material. You'd have to hold on to it for 6 months to get through it all.
Right. And, it costs $20 if you buy it at Best Buy or something like that. So instead of renting it, it's probably better to just buy it.
Okay, then let's move on because Dan wanted to tell us about a TV show that he's been enjoying. It started this year, a few months ago, and it's called Wander Over Yonder.
Yes, indeed. And I'm just going to make mention of it quick because I'm getting hooked on this and I'm a little surprised that I am. It's a kids show. It's called Wander Over Yonder. The creator of it is Craig McCracken, who you may know from the Powerpuff Girls or Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. This is his first thing for the Disney Channel, and it is possibly the sweetest Galdern space adventure that you're ever going to see. The concept is very simple. It's about this little sort of Muppet-looking guy named Wander, and he travels around the planets making friends with his trusty Zabornak, who's kind of a badass, kick-ass horse named Sylvia. Jack McBrayer does the voice of Wander. April Winchell does the voice of Sylvia. Sylvia is essentially the muscle of the team. Wander is the heart, and Wander is all heart. He is trusting. He is happy. He sees the bright side of everything. And if this sounds like it would be tedious, no, not at all. The shows are very clever. Usually these shows take the sort of attitude that when the character is seeing the bright side of everything, he's kind of an idiot. More often than not, in this show, Wander turns out to be right in his estimations. There have been some really, really cool episodes. They did do an alien satire. The episode was called The Alien. That was very nicely done. It had the nice alien atmosphere before everything went sort of comic. There was another one called The Box that featured Wander essentially being entrusted with delivering a box in which he was instructed not to look inside of, and of course his urges kept trying to get the best of him. That one included some very sort of surreal Fleischer meets MC Escher type dream sequences that were very nicely done. And one of my favorite episodes was an episode called The Troll, in which Wander is with these aliens in their kingdom when they get challenged by a troll. And the troll turns out to be this little tiny guy, but his main tactic for attack is to deliver ad hominem insults to the people he's confronting, and every time they react violently or with hurt feelings, he grows. So actually, the show was a metaphor for internet type trolls, and what I found interesting about that is that this is going out to kids. And of course, kids are facing different types of challenges than we did. They're facing different type of bullies, and this was actually an interesting and very clever metaphorical way of sort of confronting what the internet troll is, and was a very good episode. And so I'm hooked on this. The animation is great. The character designs are great. And there is some beautiful animation in it as well. And it's worth, I think, checking out.
Star rating?
I'd give this 4 stars.
Awesome. And now we're going to veer a little bit off course, but not entirely off the map. We're going onto the borderlands here, where maybe it's not science fiction or horror or fantasy, but it's related in some way that we have judged makes it of interest to our listeners. I want to talk a little bit about Saving Mr. Banks, which is the, what shall we call it, docudrama pick about Disney trying to talk the author of the Mary Poppins books into signing over the rights so he can make the classic film that we all know from seeing it when we were children. If you were so lucky, I didn't see it till a few years ago, actually. And Larry, you've seen Saving Mr. Banks, and what did you think?
Oh, I liked it. I went in thinking, well, Disney's making this, and it's going to be sugar-coated, just like a spoonful of sugar. But it's amazingly frank. P.L. Travers was, a real, to put it politely, bitch. She was... she wanted the book. She went in there and she told them exactly what she thought. She didn't want dancing penguins. She didn't want to visit Disneyland. God, no, don't bring me there. So Walt had a real terrible time with her. And, Tom Hanks doesn't really look like Walt Disney, but he does a marvelous job, I think, and especially in the final scene of the film. So he's really good and may get a Best Supporting Actor nomination. And Emma Thompson is quite good as Mrs. Travers. So, as I say, it really is not sugar-coated at all, but presents a fascinating look of what goes behind making a movie. And just from the point of view of, somebody who wasn't even really involved in writing the screenplay, but was just an advisor and somebody who Mr. Disney obviously wanted to please.
It's quite a good film. I saw it too, but I do have to offer a slight alternative opinion on this one. It's a great behind-the-scenes look at the making of a classic fantasy film. Unfortunately, as much fun as there is in seeing this author, this female author, go to Hollywood, land of patriarchy, where you're basically told, hey, honey, just sign over the rights and let us show you how it's done. She wants to, defend her work and make sure that it's dealt with, the way she wants and respectfully, and not turned into a typical cartoon with Mary Poppins cavorting about and in animation and so forth. And that's all very interesting. I have real trouble with the lengthy flashbacks to Travers' life as a young girl and the problems with her stereotypical drunk Irish father or her Australian. I mean, they're in Australia, but he sure seems Irish, being played by Colin Farrell. It leaves a really awful potential to be read in a way that's virtually offensive, because it ceases to be a movie about an author protecting her work, and it turns into a movie about a neurotic woman with daddy issues. And if she would just get over this thing she has for how disappointed she is with her dad, she would realize that she should just sign over the rights to her book and let Walt Disney do whatever the hell he wants with it. And if this were not a Disney movie but an R-rated movie, her cure would be a good fuck. But you can't do that in this film. So instead, it's a little, down-home amateur therapy in which Walt says, you really got to let go of this thing with your dad. And, in the time-honored tradition of movies, confronting someone with their neuroses cures them. Which didn't work for Freud. In fact, Sigmund coined the phrase, he said, this is about as useful as handing out menus in a famine. So in spite of all this, I don't want to appear that I dislike the movie. I just thought, this is really leaving itself open to a really nasty interpretation. So I'm waiting for an angry feminist to take a look at this movie and do the diatribe that I've hinted at here. And I really can't see the counter argument to it, except to say, in spite of all that, it still is pretty entertaining. It's fun to see Emma Thompson kind of, gradually warm up to things in Hollywood and, show a little flicker of humanity underneath the surface and stop wearing those severe outfits she has to show us that she's warmed up and become more human. So it's fun, and there's a really great moment with Hanks as Disney in which he's talking to one of the lyricists or composers on the film, one of the Sherman brothers, and the composer is saying, well, maybe she'll surprise us tomorrow. And Walt says, no, she won't. I went through this fight 20 years ago from her side of it when I was this young unknown kid, and this big producer wanted to buy, Mickey Mouse from me, and he was powerful and rich, and all I was just this kid with a sketch, but it was family. And I thought, that's good. That's interesting that he, despite the position he holds now, he completely understands and empathizes with, where she is coming from, Mrs. Travers, on this issue. And I thought, there is some nuance and sophistication of what's going on here, despite the fact that they couldn't resist those bucolic flashbacks. I guess was supposed to, I don't know, make it more of a Disney movie or give it a more of a warm, cuddly feeling. They thought the Hollywood stuff wasn't enough. I don't know.
That the surprise was that they showed as much contention as they did. And, for instance, obviously, they're not going to highlight that Disney smoked 20 packs of cigarettes a day or whatever it was, but they do show him, smoking a smoke in his office. So it's not lily white. So at least they got that much into it.
So I think still worth seeing in spite of my reservations. So there you go. Nothing's perfect. But the actual central story, what should have been the only story, but is the main story here about Mrs. Travers' clash with Disney, I think is quite good. I wish they'd cut out all the other stuff. Although I do have to admit there are 3 or 4 points in which those flashback scenes do resonate with stuff happening in the present. So you would lose something if you cut all of it out. But, on balance, that would have been the way I would have gone with it. But nobody asked me, so there you go.
And what one strange thing is the title, Saving Mr. Banks, which is, of course, it has nothing to do with Mary Poppins. So that's a little strange. It's explained in the movie, of course, because that's her father's name.
Well, it's the name of the father in the Mary Poppins story.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
so that's where the key comes in, because her father is based on Mr. Banks is based on her Colin Farrell, who plays her father. But I agree totally with Steve. What they should have done probably is done one long flashback to that, to establish that she had problems with her father. And then because it's continually cutting back and forth between the past in Australia and the present. And, the main story, as Steve says, is really what we want to see. And, by the constant cutting, it doesn't really work that well, I don't think.
So I would give it, I think, at least a 3, maybe a 4 if I were in a generous mood. How about you, Larry?
I would probably give it 3.5 too.
You're trying to split the difference.
We're supposed to be getting away from that, Larry.
Well, hey, I said 3 or 4. That's just as indecisive.
Yeah,
so I'm the pot calling the kettle black. What can I say? So that said, are we out of stuff to talk about?
Yeah, I think so.
I know before we started recording, I said we were going to do this quick, and of course I was lying. I don't know if you believe me, but there you go. You fell for it again, like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football. It's the same old story over and over again. Anyway, thank you, Dan Persons, for sitting here for all this time.
Okay.
And Lawrence French, thank you too.
You're welcome.
And I want to advise all the listeners out there, don't forget to visit Cinefantastique online for more news and reviews of horror, fantasy, and science fiction films. And let me sign off by quoting the prophetic words of renowned paleontologist Dr. Yamane, who said, "I can't believe that Godzilla was the only surviving member of its species. If we continue conducting nuclear tests, it's possible that another Godzilla might appear somewhere in the world again." This podcast is copyright 2013, Steve Biodrowski. All music composed by Steve Biodrowski, performed by Gothique, all rights reserved, no unauthorized duplication without permission.
Let me bring this up because, as long as we're doing a fade out, this was one of the things I wanted to bring up, was that they did do this thing and I've seen this a couple of times before. It starts as a normal trailer for Walking with Dinosaurs, right? And you're watching it and you're getting into it, and more or less getting into it as much as you can with something called Walking with Dinosaurs. And then the screen shrinks down into a little video screen, And it turns out to be a pitch for watching the film in the movie theater rather than watching it on video. You know, you can't see action this big on a screen this small. I think that's the actual catchphrase for the thing. And, you know, it's not like they haven't done it before, but before, when they were doing it, they were coming up with their own footage. You know, and they do, you know, sort of like an alien invasion thing. It was not from an actual movie or anything. And so you got the point, you know, that that's what this was about. And this sort of bugged me a little bit, you know, because you're starting in and you just
felt the integrity of the Walking with Dinosaur film had been violated.
Yeah, or the Walking with Dinosaur trailer had been violated.
I'm surprised you care enough to care.
I know.
For a trailer, I wouldn't think that would be, you know, worth talking about, right?
I haven't seen that exactly. I mean, you know, they certainly did a lot of stuff with Frankenweenie, in which they were, you know, using footage to deliver little messages about don't text.
I don't know. For some reason, this sort of caught in my craw.
You're not a happy camper.